Nobody's around. Anyway, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a library is, it's a lot like this iPad, except the iPad's a lot smaller and doesn't weigh nearly as much and is a lot easier to carry around. I'm here doing a little bit of apartment research. You know, when you look at all the apartment development activity going on right now, you see a lot of very interesting innovation. For example, if you look at the mural apartments built by Harbor Properties a couple years ago, now Harbor Urban, and designed by Hewitt Architects, they incorporated some features that we're seeing a lot more often now in new development. Things like Pullman kitchen, and then a very open living concept with partition walls to the bedrooms, and a lot of other features like that. It pays, when you look at these innovations, to say, well, let's take a step back and look at some trends over time. You know, our Puget Sound region has undergone 7 building cycles so far. The first one at the turn of the 20th century, another one in the 1920s, another one in the early to mid 1950s, then the late 60s, again in the late 70s, late 80s, late 90s, and now we're in another building boom that we expect will peak probably in 2016. Now, each of these booms brings with it some new innovations. So if you look back to the turn of the 20th century, a little over 100 years ago, you see properties like the De La Mar that was built in 1909, and then moving on into buildings like the Cornelius Apartments built in 1926. You can see a change in the architectural style from the beginning of the 20th century that had a lot of Italianate kind of flourishes to a more simple design in the late 1920s. But this whole period of time introduced a number of innovations, actually. Innovations like the Murphy bed that came along in 1900. And then even some properties like the De La Mar had disappearing beds. These are beds that just rolled out from underneath the bathroom floor. The bathroom floor was elevated a little bit. A lot of these properties had grand lobbies that residents would just sort of sit around in, and got quite a lot of enjoyment watching the switchboard operators work the phones, a pretty new invention. They were all urban focused. They all relied on public transportation. They either had no parking or maybe back into the 1920s, there started to be a little bit of parking, but not a lot. One of the reasons for it was they had great urban locations and there was a lot of public transportation. But another factor was when the Model T was introduced in 1908, a brand new Model T cost $825. That sounds like a good price for a new car today, but when you consider that the average salary back then was about $1,200 a year, that made cars pretty expensive. Then we saw more innovation as we moved on. The 1005 apartments, that's an Anhalt. Fred Anhalt built a number of these, essentially castles around Seattle. This was built around 1930. This type of property started to introduce some more features like dishwashers, much better sound insulation. They actually had double floor soundproofing that Fred Anhalt invented at that time. And then we move into the late 1930s with properties like the Edgewater. Now, this is a Seattle property, but at the time, it might have been considered a little bit suburban. We wouldn't consider that today, though. And this, in 1938, was the invention of the garden court apartment that became so popular later. In 1948, we started to see the addition of what we call 608s. It was the FHA 608 program. A lot of properties in the late 1940s into the very early 1950s were built under this program. They had very modern floor plans. Back in the turn of the 20th century and into the 20s, we really saw floor plans much different than we see today. And so with the 608s, we see floor plans that are very similar to the floor plans that came later in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even now. The other thing that happened with these 608s, another interesting innovation, not really a design feature, is that this was the birth of extremely high leverage. Developers that we talked to mostly many years ago who had built some of these 608s sort of waxed fondly over the experience. They pretty much got 100 or 115% financing to build these projects. So before they even opened their doors to start lease up, they had put money in their pockets. So extreme leverage isn't something that just happened in our financial meltdown a few years ago. It really began quite a while ago. Then the next building boom into the mid-1950s saw the creation of what we call the motel-style apartment property. It typically had outdoor walkways that entered the unit, very efficient design, mostly concrete block. And this period also saw the birth of movable wall partitions. Pullman kitchens became very popular in this period, something that we see developers and architects implementing once again today. The next building boom occurred in the 1970s, late 60s, 1970s. We really saw the expansion of the garden court apartment. It didn't really catch on in 1938 with the Edgewater. It was a very short experiment, but in the late 60s, the garden court really came into focus. The garden court really catered to the baby boom population and also young families, boomers with planning to have young families. It was really a suburban product for the most part. It really expanded our region into suburban areas. We saw the addition of features like decks, dishwashers, disposers. These all just became common features at that time. And then in the early 1980s, we started to see the design ramp up a little bit. This Riverstone development down in Federal Way, it was originally called Heatherwood. And when Jerry Wright built it, he advertised it as little doll houses. And they really were. At that time, it was a real innovative look. He sort of brought that up from California with him. And the market really kind of downplayed it. But this really started to take hold, and we saw more and more design features go into apartments as a result. I'm not saying it was this particular property or developer that did it, but at this time we really saw the inclusion of fireplaces in a lot more units, washers and dryers in the units, and just more amenities overall in the units themselves. Then that ramped up in the early 1990s, Carolyn Heights, and Carolyn Heights was really a double A or a triple A type property. And so in the 90s, we saw the expansion of a very high level of quality finish and amenities, much more home-like design, high ceilings, and very large units. And so over this whole period of time, basically 100 years or so, we really saw the evolution of the apartment market. But occasionally developers would dip back, like they dipped back to the 1930s for the garden court style of apartments, and like developers are dipping back today into the 1950s for Pullman kitchens, movable partition walls, and things like that. So when you look at these trends, another interesting trend is emerging. So over this whole period of time, back in the early 1920s, apartments were small. They averaged 500 square feet or so. And then apartments got bigger and bigger through the garden court boom in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and sort of peaked out around 2000 at a little over 900 square feet on average. So apartments almost doubled in size over that period of time. Now, what we've seen in the last 10 years, particularly just in the last few years, is apartments are getting smaller again. Now, in 1900, 1920, you could handle a small apartment. You still had room to move around in it because you didn't have a refrigerator. You had an ice box on the counter. You didn't have a dishwasher until about 1930, and even then it was very rare to have dishwashers. You probably didn't have, a large stereo system, a TV. You didn't have that, and so you had room in your apartment. But as these new innovations came into play, dishwashers, large refrigerators, large televisions, remember those big boxes, big stereo systems, we needed more space. And so that's what we got in the 1960s and 1970s. But now we're back to this. This is your TV, this is your stereo, this is your book collection, your record collection, CD collection, it's pretty much everything. And so we're able to scale back down again, and that also fits the lifestyle of the Gen Y consumer. We've talked about that in a lot of other video articles over time. So we are seeing apartments get smaller. The full article that's sort of attached to this video, we posted the article this morning on our website at www.duprescott.com. The article is called Back to the Future. It goes into a lot more detail about the innovations that took place in all of these building cycles, and also some of the current innovations that are taking place, and what we might look forward to in the next few years. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you'll come back next week for another weekly apartment market update.